Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. I had a very nice vacation. I did some YouTube shorts, but mostly just unplugged. I'm back in the swing. We got Alec Baldwin's trial starting tomorrow. So I wanted to do a little what we know so far episode before jury selection begins. Before we dive in, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Just click that little bell icon. Music fact of the day, the song No One Is to Blame by Howard Jones is really about wanting things you can't have, but realizing that's just part of the human condition. We want things and it doesn't seem to be happening, but it is the thing that can drive you forward and move you forward. There you go. Now you know. So Alec Baldwin's trial starts tomorrow. He is charged with involuntary manslaughter in the shooting death of Halyna Hutchins. She was the cinematographer on the set of the movie Rust. She was shot at 1:46 p.m. on October 21st of 2021. That was being filmed at the Bonanza Creek Ranch in New Mexico. It's a very popular set where Westerns are filmed. She was married with a 9-year-old son at the time of her death. She was born in Ukraine and as a child lived on a Russian military base in the Arctic. She took an interest in film and journalism early on, and in college, she studied economics and international journalism. She met her husband while working in LA, and when she moved to the US, she earned a master's degree in 2015 from the American Film Institute Conservatory. She began working in film and TV as a cinematographer. It was a job she loved. Cinematographers decide how that final picture is going to look as far as the colors, the lighting, the background. And she was working in that capacity on the set of Rust when she was shot and killed. Her friends and colleagues say she was a gifted artist and loving wife and mother. Also injured from that very same projectile was the director, Joel Souza. The bullet traveled through Miss Hutchins and then went through Mr. Souza's shoulder. He survived and actually testified at Hannah Gutierrez Reed's trial earlier this year. She was the armorer on set. Let's go through how projectiles should be checked before being handed to an actor on set. You have your armorer who is responsible for every single firearm and every single projectile on that set. Also, the first assistant director should check in front of each other. So there should be 2 checks before that's handed to the actor. The actor can ask for a 3rd check in person, but Alec Baldwin did not. He claimed he pulled back the hammer of the revolver, but did not pull the trigger. He said the weapon malfunctioned and fired on its own. He was also told the weapon did not have live ammunition. Now, in an interview with ABC News, he said he was taking direction from Miss Hutchins and pulled the hammer back as far as he could without actually cocking the hammer. Last year, he was charged with involuntary manslaughter, and that had a firearm enhancement charge that carried an extra 5 years in addition to the 18 months he's facing for the involuntary manslaughter. That enhancement was dropped, reducing that possible sentence by 5 years. And then the involuntary manslaughter charges were dismissed in April of last year because there was more investigation needed by the prosecution. After a forensic analysis of the weapon by the FBI, it was determined the firearm could not have fired on its own and the trigger had to have been pulled. The FBI tested the weapon by hitting it with a rubber mallet repeatedly to see if that gun would fire on its own. The weapon did fire when the butt of the gun was hit, but the agent testified that was due to the damage from the test itself and ultimately concluded the firearm was not capable of misfiring when Miss Hutchins was shot and killed. That FBI expert is expected to take the stand again during Baldwin's trial. His defense attorneys objected to that, but it's coming in. He was recharged in January of this year after that firearm testing was complete before the Armorer Hannah Gutierrez Reed's trial. Baldwin's lawyers were not able to test the firearm themselves due to the damage from hitting it with the rubber mallet. That was one of the reasons they asked the charges to be dismissed, but that was denied by Judge Mary Marlowe Summer, who said the jury would be told of the destructive nature of the firearm testing. During Hannah Gutierrez Reed's trial, we got a glimpse of what's to come for his in a way. Her trial's a lot different because she was the armorer. He was the actor on set. But it was revealed the set was chaotic with improper handling of firearms that was pointed out at her trial, as well as two accidental discharges of blank rounds prior to the fatal shooting of Miss Hutchins and the injury to Mr. Souza. In fact, the camera crew walked off set the night before the fatal shooting, citing safety concerns as well as other issues. There were calls and text messages that were released by the sheriff's department where Baldwin said all films look to cut cost and it's not the actor's responsibility to check the firearm. The prosecutor, Carrie Morrissey, accused Baldwin of being reckless during filming, writing, to watch Mr. Baldwin's conduct on the set of Rust is to witness a man who has absolutely no control of his own emotions and absolutely no concern for how his conduct affects those around him. Witnesses have testified that this was the exact conduct that contributed to safety compromises on set. Now, at the trial for the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, it was argued by her defense that she was hired to perform two different roles: props assistant and then her main job as the armorer on set. They explained during her trial that these are not prop guns. The guns are made to look old, but it's actually a brand new functioning gun that's purchased from the manufacturer for the movie. The armorer is the one who sources and purchases dummy and blank ammunition to be used on set. Now, with a blank round, it's easy to tell the end of the projectile is crimped, and blanks are used because when the trigger is pulled, there is enough gunpowder in the blank that causes a pop and smoke, but there's no projectile that shoots through the barrel of the gun. A second type of round used on set are dummy rounds. Dummies look like real bullets. You can't tell it from a live bullet just by looking. Each round has to be thoroughly checked before loaded into a firearm. And an armorer can check three ways to be sure the round is not live. The first way is to shake it. There's little BBs or springs inside, and you can hear an audible noise that confirms it is a dummy round. The second way is to look for a hole drilled into the side of the casing. The third way is there is no primer. There is a hole on the bottom of the projectile where a primer would be. That firearm should have gone through two separate checks before being handed to Mr. Baldwin. The first is done by the armorer and then the first assistant director. The armorer's trial ended in a guilty verdict with an 18-month sentence, and the first assistant director, David Halls, pleaded guilty to negligent use of a deadly weapon. He was sentenced to 6 months of unsupervised probation. The day the shooting happened was chaotic on the set. The evening before, a group of the camera operators had safety concerns, and they sent an email to the production team saying they were quitting. The next day, the producers decided to continue and use less camera equipment than normal. The morning of the shooting, it was said that filming was normal. They did film several scenes, and leading up to lunch, cast and crew were working to get shots of Alec Baldwin sitting on a church pew, manipulating his revolver and practicing a draw from his holster. That was completed before lunch, and then they took their lunch break. During lunch, the armorer, Hannah, took the gun from Mr. Baldwin and took it back to the gun safe. After lunch, production decided to continue working, but they were not filming. They were blocking, which is a rough rehearsal where the crew gets lighting and things like that situated before moving into the actual rehearsal. During Hannah's trial, it was said there was no need for an actor to have a live firearm or for one to even be on set during blocking. The actor could have used a stick, a rubber gun, their finger, or anything to mimic the firearm. That day, she was asked to provide the real gun for blocking, and it was in her discretion to do so. She loaded the gun in the morning with 5 rounds. That revolver was a 6-shooter. After lunch, she got the gun from the safe and cleaned that 6th slot and loaded a round in there. Then she took the firearm to the church and handed it to the first assistant director, Dave Halls. They did a very sloppy and incomplete safety check of the gun. They did not shake the rounds to see if they made sounds or check for the hole that should be drilled into the side, indicating this was safe. Instead, she cracked open the gun and partially spun the cylinder to show the rounds to the assistant director. Those rounds were not removed from the gun and, again, were not checked. And because the dummy rounds look so similar to real rounds, just spinning the barrel to check wasn't enough. She handed the firearm to Mr. Halls, left the church, and then Mr. Halls handed the firearm to Mr. Baldwin. At Hannah's trial, witnesses testified she got the firearm from the safe after lunch. She should have pulled each projectile and checked to be sure that they were safe. Then, when handing the firearm to the first assistant director, there should have been a second complete ammo check with Mr. Halls because this is what is done to prevent what happened to Miss Hutchins. As that blocking session was underway, Miss Hutchins and crew were working, adjusting cameras, lighting, and Mr. Baldwin was practicing holding his gun for the upcoming filming and was manipulating that firearm. It discharged and hit Miss Hutchins. In Hannah's trial, witnesses testified she routinely failed to carry out her duties as an armorer. They said her conduct was unprofessional and sloppy. She would leave guns and ammo lying around unattended, and her gun safe and cart were usually disorganized. There was a box labeled dummies, and in that box, there was a silver primer on one projectile, which means that was a live round. Live rounds were also seen on bandoliers and gun belts the actors wore on set. The live rounds spread their way through the set, landing in actors' costumes and firearms that were seen either in photographs or on video on October 13th, 15th, 17th, and the 21st. At Hannah's trial, an opening statement said that Mr. Baldwin pointed a gun on the set with the hammer cocked, pointed it right at Miss Hutchins, and pulled the trigger, hitting her. They also point out Hannah was not in the church at this point. It was Alec Baldwin in possession of the firearm. Her defense attorney said that there were mistakes by production and the state tried to put it all on Hannah. She was 24 years old and hired for 2 jobs as a props assistant and the armorer. They talk about making her roll cowboy cigarettes and how that would take away from her armorer duties. In this case, OSHA investigated and found fault with production, numerous flaws and mistakes, and her defense attorney says not with her. They said it was a rushed set and there were several safety errors. They pointed out in her trial that Hannah took the gun to the first assistant director, Mr. Halls. He had the weapon and did not inspect it fully, and Mr. Baldwin did not inspect the gun at all. They said when he was sitting in the pew doing that draw, you hear how dangerous that is, doing a cross pull, which is pulling that weapon across your body and possibly across the path of other people. Now, they say that Hannah requested to train Mr. Baldwin in a cross draw. They say he did not set up that training. The shooting happened during a cross draw. The blocking did not require him to draw the gun. It was supposed to be a close up of his hand, and it ended up pointed at the camera and Miss Hutchins. Again, Baldwin says he was going at the direction of the victim, Miss Hutchins. At Hannah's trial, they pointed out that there are camera tricks that can be used, but Mr. Baldwin violated safety rules. In fact, OSHA fined Russ Productions the largest in the history of New Mexico because they didn't have a procedure to make sure live rounds were not on set. The first assistant director did not conduct daily safety meetings. There was no instruction before Baldwin handled the gun in the church. And Mr. Baldwin was one of the lead producers and also the main actor. Her defense attorneys say he really controlled the set and violated the most basic safety rules. They say that Baldwin violated the rules that you should practice on set with a firearm, which is don't point it at anyone, treat them all as if they're loaded, and don't put your hand on the trigger. We're expecting some crew members to testify who were inside the church when the shooting occurred, including a crew member who is expected to say he saw Baldwin pull the trigger. Director Joel Souza, who was injured, is expected to take the stand as well. Hannah, not really expected to take the stand. The judge made clear she's not cooperated, and the judge also rejected an immunity deal with her just recently. I do think Alec Baldwin has to take the stand in this trial. I don't see a way around it. Maybe his attorneys don't want to put him up there, but It will be very interesting if he does. Joshua Katzenberg, who's a criminal professor at the University of New Mexico, told The Guardian, if you're going to find someone guilty of criminal negligence, you have to prove the defendant owns the negligence almost in its entirety. And that's a difficult case where there was more than one participant. And a jury already found someone else guilty. So, jury selection begins tomorrow. The judge has set the trial for 9 days. I've never seen a judge set a time limit on a criminal trial, but we will see. I'll be providing nightly coverage. I'll recap 8 hours of testimony in an hour or less, and we'll let you know as things progress throughout this trial. But for this today, I just wanted to bring in some of the points we learned from Hannah's trial that's definitely going to come in at his trial. We'll have a full week of episodes coming at you since I've been resting up for over a week. All right, guys. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day. We will see you soon.